People have an awfully hard time believing me for whatever reason when I blame a large part of the struggles I've always had to deal with on my country. So I decided that I want to read some personal accounts of other people who understand exactly how I feel and share my sentiments 100%. So here we go. Whites from other nations are not like Canadians. There are no people on earth like Canadians, whom I think are probably the least socially developed whites anywhere in the world, yet possess an attitude of superiority for all other groups in the world. They are way behind, and it's not surprising that they make ethnic and racial jokes from the 60s. I think this comes from the fact that the country is hard to live in, and the people in the country haven't been outside of it. Americans, on the other hand, tend to be social and friendly, not so soulless and with dead eyes. This problem should have been solved long ago, but now the country is crumbling and the problems expressed here by the racist Canadian whites are part of the larger issue. The frustration expressed only illustrates the extent to which the country is decaying, and that is expected of any country that is eating itself from within. Canada failed to establish a soul, a national culture and identity, and the whites have assumed being white means being Canadian. But since that fabled effort wasn't strong to begin with, and now its time had come and gone, the problems a real country could have solved fairly easily are now unsolvable. You can't make being white a nationality, since there are many white, as there are nations and continents consisting of various races. A nationality. There simply has to be a bigger unifying factor, as this isn't the colonial era. A modern nation-state requires solid foundations with own structural capacity to survive, something Canada clearly failed. I have been to Canada. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't nice, it wasn't livable, and it wasn't fun. It was like I've gone back in time. I've been to nearly a dozen countries, and I've never known a country like Canada, which shouldn't really be called a country since it's a congregation of ethnic groups that have little to do with each other. White Canadians are like the Freemasons. They have their own secret culture, language, rules of conduct, and ways of identifying one another. If you are a visible minority or an immigrant, you will never be invited into their club. They will be politely reserved to you, but will not accept you nor your non-Canadian education or qualifications. They will not become close friends with you and will barely tolerate you. They live in gentrified white enclaves and do not want you moving next door to them or your children playing with theirs. They will ensure their own kind is promoted and that you are left in dead-end jobs. They have a betting game where they name immigrants they know who either gave up and went back home or have been passed up for promotion or lost out on a job. The person who can name the most is considered the winner. For all the lip service about multiculturalism, you are not wanted. The country is decaying and barely survives by heavily taxing its aging population and the working poor, including immigrants that they treat awful and consider second class due to their racial ethnic composition. The average white Canadian views non-whites with utter contempt and condescension. In addition, they are stuck in the colonial era. The Canadian government, which is incredibly corrupt, advertises the country to anyone willing to come without taking into consideration the lack of social and economic accommodation necessary to assimilate prospective immigrants. There's probably no country on earth like Canada where the general population dwells in such depressive state. Such blandness, faking, expensive, incredibly miserable and boring, not to mention their delusional attitude. They don't like seeing others happy and having good times. Misery loves company. And I think it's kind of funny, this line in particular. The Canadian government, which is incredibly corrupt, advertises the country to anyone willing to come without taking into consideration the lack of social and economic accommodation necessary to assimilate prospective immigrants. That is one of the most accurate statements I have ever seen, and all those statements that I read previously, they reflect my own personal experiences 100%, but this particular line is very applicable to the current situation with our current liberal government. I think a lot of people here assume that any given person living in a country like Syria, they must automatically jump at the chance of being able to immigrate to a country like Canada. But when you look at statistics that were actually compiled by the United Nations, it seems that it's not necessarily the case, and it's actually only a small percentage, a very small percentage of people who express any kind of interest in coming to Canada when they're asked about it. And even the people that have already been resettled here are saying that they feel like it wasn't the right decision for them, and they actually kind of regret coming all the way here from the camps that they were previously staying in Turkey or other neighboring countries around their home country, because like I said previously, now they're trying to become assimilated in a culture that doesn't even want to assimilate them. This is how, like, honestly, I believe the average Canadian really feels about the situation here.
We've become a country hell-bent on helping foreigners. When I pay taxes and when other Canadians pay taxes, I'd like to think they are going to Canadians and making Canada a better place to live. But that isn't the case. It wasn't always this way. Migrants used to come into Canada with a higher relative skill level, earning more money and paying more in taxes. They actually benefited the country. Nowadays, migrants come into Canada with a lower skill level relative to other Canadians, earn less money, and pay less in taxes. So much for common sense. We don't just take in the best and the brightest anymore. We take in anyone who wants in. Unfortunately, things are looking like they're going to get worse before they get better.
So as of now, there is in fact an emergency situation where funds that were set aside for just such an event have instead been spent on people who, for the most part, did not even want to leave their home country, or at least the neighboring countries that would have made their families back home much more accessible. And I just have to say that now 80,000 residents of Canada are homeless as a result of this disastrous event, and it just seems to me like karma. Like, I can't believe that they did not see this kind of thing coming. Of course, when you're in a position where you can't even help, like, your neighbors out or people around you, like, I know for a fact that we can't even treat each other correctly. We don't even know how to help other people who have lived in this country for the longest period and are already perfectly assimilated into the culture and everything. Because my own psychiatrist, she thinks it's normal for people to tell people that haven't done anything wrong and are in a situation where they're in desperate need of somebody who's empathetic and caring towards them. She thinks it's normal for them to tell them, like, to get rid of them in a subtle way, and she thinks that is something like, if somebody sent you a message asking if you wanted to make a purchase from one of their friends as like an offer for something for sale, like, she told me when that happened to me, that was probably her way of getting rid of you and saying goodbye to you. And she was saying that like it's a perfectly normal thing. And I just think there's no way that somebody who's not a psychopath with zero compassion would do that kind of thing. But of course, unfortunately, that is just the mentality that I've noticed everyone else around me has. They, for the vast majority of the people here, that is all that they are concerned with, is their immediate circle of family and friends, and they're all incredibly insular and uncaring of people like right next to them on the street who are in need. And so if that is the kind of mentality that they have, like, how can you expect to help anyone else before you're able to help yourselves?